Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to start on time, so I'll kick us off right now. We are so excited to have you here and to be launching the culmination of about 2 years of effort across all of these different pieces. As you can see on the screen, we are launching new themes for racial equity, gender lens, quality healthcare, biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, and clean energy in IRIS+. I'm joined here on the line by my colleagues, Kellen Dorio on the IRIS+ team and Sophia Sunderji on the research team at the GIIN. I'm also joined by our incredible partner, Mahalet Getachew from PolicyLink, who will be bringing a bit of her perspective on why this content and why this release matters today. Before we get going, just a little bit of housekeeping up front. We are recording the conversation, and that's so that we can add it to our webinars page for those people who were not able to join our conversation this morning. We'll ask everybody to stay on mute for the conversation, and you can also feel free to stay on or off video as you prefer. We have a Q&A box for questions as we go along. Please feel free to use that. That's where we'll pull the questions from once we get to that portion of the conversation. And finally, if you do have tech issues, please reach out to Kellen, who's on the line and on the video at the moment, and she will help to troubleshoot. So with that, I'm going to start off by just giving us a little bit of background on the Global Impact Investing Network, also known as the GIIN, and on IRIS+. Many of you will already be familiar with both of these entities and these systems, but to make sure that everybody's on the same page and to really land how important this work is, we'll start there. From there, we'll talk about what exactly we're launching and how we got to this point. We'll cover why this launch matters, and it really does matter in a lot of different ways. And finally, we'll talk about what's next before getting into your questions. So I'll start with a little bit of background on the Global Impact Investing Network, which is also known as the GIIN. The GIIN aspires to create a world in which all investments, not just impact investments, but all investments consider social and environmental impact alongside risk and return. So really thinking about those two as part and parcel of the same conversation. The GIIN itself is known by many as the global champion of impact investing, and we're a nonprofit dedicated to scaling the size and the effectiveness of impact investing as a space. IRIS+ is managed by the GIIN, and it's a system that helps impact investors and others translate impact intentions into impact results. We do that in a number of different ways. Many of you on the line I already know are users, but at a very high level, this is the generally accepted system to measure, manage, and optimize impact. You can see here a couple of the key pieces of the system. If you haven't yet been part of one of our demo sessions to really get in and see all of the different components of the system and how they work for different actors, do feel free to sign up for one of those coming up. We will be listing a couple of new ones in the next couple of hours. We'll send that out in a follow-up IRIS newsletter shortly. Within the system, there are core metric sets that guide investors and others on what the industry has kind of validated as starter kits of core metrics. These are used to measure progress towards impact goals and to kind of create an industry that has more comparable and deeper impact information. That is all based on a deep catalog of now over 700 metrics. These help for a little bit more depth and allow for customization in comparable information. There's a deep evidence base comprised of the most up-to-date evidence on particular outcomes tied to different business strategies. And those are backed by how-to guidance on how to use IRIS+, and how to do impact measurement and management even better. All of this is based on a deep alignment and constant conversation with many, many different standards in the space. We're currently aligned to about 54 different standards. And the pieces that we're talking about today are part of an important public good for this space. This drives the industry towards greater, deeper, and better impact data for decision making. The system to date has built in consultation with over 1,600 stakeholders. As you can see here, we talk to, engage with, test with, and ask for feedback from all sorts of different actors, asset allocators of different types and angles, fund managers, consultants, evaluators, researchers, data providers, and platforms. And we do that from all geographies, because if we're going to build a system that really does drive towards comparable data and deeper impact insights across the world, we need to be hearing from people from all different geographies. IRIS solves for a couple of key needs in impact measurement and management. Kind of core to our offering and our goals are consistent implementation of norms and principles. The industry is evolving very, very quickly, and we're learning more and more every day and every year about what it takes to be applying best practice in an impact investing portfolio. And so we derive and we build all of our systems in line with those norms and principles so that we can help investors skip ahead to already adopting those just by nature of using the system. We offer core metrics for clear and comparable data. And as I mentioned, streamlined best-in-class resources as well. It can be difficult for many investors to keep up with the constant releases of really important and useful guidance produced by many in the space. And so we aggregate and we highlight and we help connect investors with those indices and data collection tools and methodologies that can be most useful to them. Since we launched the newest version of IRIS Plus in May 2019, we've had nearly 300,000 visitors to the site globally, constantly and currently used by about 26,000 users, active users. And as you can see here, a wide array of different geographies represented, both in users and in folks providing feedback and vetting. Also, 83% of top investors by AUM are using IRIS Plus at this point, which is really exciting for those of us who have been a part of this process for a while now. Just a quick highlight of today's launch by the numbers. Today, we're launching 6 new and updated themes, and my colleague Kellen will speak about that in a little bit more depth in just a moment. Alongside these themes, or as part of them, we'll have 17 new strategic goals, which represents about a 30% increase in coverage within the system. We were really delighted to work with 596 different individuals who are involved in creating, ideating, vetting the content that we'll present to you today. And through that process, we identified the need for 51 new metrics, which were passed within the catalog before and are now added and available to all 26,000+ users in the system. Before we dive into exactly what's included here, a heartfelt and a big thank you to our incredible partners. Each one of the themes that we have developed are developed in deep conversation and hearing that my audio enough. Is it better now? Can't hear me. I see that. Let's see. Can you hear me now? No. Helen, can you take over here? You try. So thank you, Tara.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me? Okay, thank you. So yes, we're thanking our expert partner organizations, including PolicyLink, CapEQ, FSG, and Just Capital on the racial equity theme, WWF-Netherlands, and Arcadis on the biodiversity theme, the Sustainable Finance Institute on the clean energy theme, and the Croatan Institute, Criterion Institute on the sustainable agriculture theme, as well as the Center for Health Markets Innovation on the access to quality healthcare theme. And thank you to our theme contributors, so many of you, as you can see from just a sampling of the logos on this slide. So now to discuss what exactly is launching today and how we got to the point of this launch. So today we are launching 6 themes in IRIS+. This includes 4 completely new themes which span impact categories that are both critical to and have been highly requested by the market. These 4 new themes are racial equity, sustainable agriculture, clean energy, and biodiversity and ecosystems. And we'll dive into what exactly is in each of these themes in just a bit. Now, alongside these 4 new themes, we have 1 new strategic goal launching in the gender lens theme, which is increasing capital allocated to women and LGBTQIA+ entrepreneurs. We are also, for the first time, launching a refresh of an existing IRIS+ theme, access to quality healthcare. So this updated version adds to the existing emerging markets focused content a racial equity lens that focuses on racial disparities in access to healthcare in the developed market. It also includes a COVID recovery lens for all geographies. And this update was done alongside 2 consultants who are experts in both the racial equity and public health spaces. So each of these themes has been an active conversation for the past 18 to 24 months, alongside almost 600 individual working group members and 10 partner organizations. So we engaged with a wide variety of actors from all over the world across all different stakeholder groups throughout this process. And we have learned so much from the thoughtful feedback and the deep research of some of the most respected names in each of their respective fields in the world, which we were so proud to have been able to partner with. Now, for a quick look at some of the broad range of topics covered across the 22 strategic goals launching or relaunching today. This list is not exhaustive, it's just highlighting a few keywords per theme. So as we just talked a bit about the racial equity lens as it applies to healthcare, the racial equity theme is developed to be a lens that flows across all the themes within the system through its power, risk, and justice framework, which Mahalet will dive into later in the session. The biodiversity theme focuses include ecosystems on land and water and nature-based solutions. The sustainable agriculture theme builds on these biodiversity conversations while weaving in discussions of food security, climate resilience, and equity and justice. And the clean energy theme talks about all major parts of the energy cycle while weaving in conversations surrounding equity and access throughout. So this launch today significantly adds to the breadth of IRIS+'s thematic coverage. It increases our theme count by almost a full third. As you can see on the left, we still have a lot of exciting themes in the development pipeline, and the next up will be climate adaptation and resilience. So we encourage any of you on the line interested in that theme to get in touch about joining the scoping process. Now, Sophia will discuss in a bit these themes and the metrics developed under them work in service of creating stronger analytics and greater transparency in the market. And this is done through the impact benchmarks. So now that you have all the details on what is launching today, I will pass it back over to Lissa to talk a bit more about why this launch matters and why we're so excited about it.
Can you hear me now by any chance? Great. Okay. Let me know if my sound goes out again. I'll try to keep talking. Otherwise, Kellen will take us away. So now to talk, as Kellen mentioned, a little bit more about why this actually matters. This launch is critical for a number of reasons. The first and foremost is that we're looking to, and with this launch we will, provide better coverage for all 26,000 plus current IRIS+ users. As I mentioned, across the world, this is an important tool for a number of actors, both asset allocators and fund managers, and many, many different actors within the space, and we're excited to be bringing this work to them. It's also important because it brings a much, much deeper and more thoughtful equity lens across themes. This is a conversation that was driven in large part by our partners on the racial equity theme, and I'm delighted to invite Mahalet Getachew from PolicyLink to share a little bit more from her perspective about why this launch matters.
Thank you so much, Lissa. Can you hear me okay? Great. It's an honor to be with you all today and part of this critical launch. As the Managing Director of Corporate Racial Equity at PolicyLink, my work focuses on igniting the racial equity movement more broadly and more deeply in the business and investing worlds. For those of you that do not know PolicyLink, we're a national research and action institute based in Oakland, California, devoted to advancing racial and economic equity for over 2 decades. Our guiding ethos in this work is equity. That means the just and fair inclusion into a society in which all of us, not just some of us, can participate, prosper, and reach our full potential. On behalf of PolicyLink and our partners in the Corporate Racial Equity Alliance, we're so proud to partner with the GIIN in the development and launch of the new racial equity theme for Iris Plus. Together with our partners, as you saw on a few slides back with the logos there, we are in the midst of a multi-year effort to set a new normal for equity in all aspects of business and investing through the development of robust equity standards. The racial equity theme launching on Iris Plus today marks a key milestone in our efforts, embedding equity in investment strategies and turning the lens inward to ensure investors hold themselves accountable to achieving equitable outcomes in all aspects of their work. Along with the other themes launching today, we hope this helps build and strengthen the pathway for the bold investor leadership we need today to meet the scale of the challenges before us. In the same way that we know we cannot achieve racial and economic equity without business leaders being in lockstep with us in civil society, we also know we need investors to unabashedly champion equity too. People of color are dramatically underrepresented as decision makers in the financial industry, as well as dramatically underrepresented as beneficiaries of capital investments. This continues to fuel unequal and unjust allocation and distribution of capital, allowing majority groups to benefit more from the tools of capitalism as compared to people of color. As more investors begin to recognize the powerful and essential role they have to play in advancing racial equity, it's more important than ever that we have a unified approach to integrating racial equity into everyday practices, policies, and investing strategies to close racial gaps within their 4 walls and within the businesses and communities investors invest in. The new racial equity investing guidance and metrics, it centers on 3 complementary and mutually reinforcing strategic investment goals: increasing the power of people of color, shifting the perception of riskiness of investing in people of color and communities of color, and creating just systems that produce equitable outcomes. The accompanying guidance will help investors understand the policies and practices that perpetuate inequity and the way forward to ensure their portfolios are actually driving equity. The key takeaway from the new racial equity theme then is that all investments should have equitable impacts. Racial equity, it's not a niche investment approach. It is not meant to be a la carte. This launch matters because we need a new normal where all investors intentionally integrate racial equity awareness and action in their investment strategies, portfolio decisions, and evaluation of their return on investment. This launch matters because equity is everybody's job, and there's no sector that can sit on the sidelines. The time for investors to center equity has never been more urgent. Globally, widening inequality and racial and ethnic discrimination threaten peace, social cohesion, and economic stability. In America alone, nearly 100 million people live in economic insecurity and they're locked out of fair opportunities to thrive. Achieving racial equity, then, it's a defining opportunity of our time. And we know that what got us here is not what will carry us toward an equitable and sustainable future for all. We need to do more, we need to be more, and we also know that we're in the midst of incredible headwinds against equity today, with zero-sum narratives about racial equity proliferating everywhere. We know this will continue. So now more than ever, we need to work together across sectors to address the profound social and economic risks presented by racial inequality. We all need to be marching forward together in locked arms with an uncompromising focus on achieving equitable outcomes in our work. So thank you tremendously to the GIIN for this incredible opportunity to partner together in this groundbreaking work. It means a lot to us, and I also want to thank everyone who participated in co-creating the themes launching today, especially the organizations who have toiled for decades in service of racial justice. We honor you and are eternally grateful for your leadership. Thank you, Lissa.
Thank you, Mahalet. And echo everything that you've just said. It was so incredible to work with you and your partners and with all of the folks who were involved in those conversations. I'll move us along then to the other reason why this launch matters. This work sets a foundation for comparable impact data and impact analytics that investors really need to be able to make stronger and better and more evidence-backed decisions about their investments. And to that point, I'll invite my colleague Sophia Sunderji, who leads the GIIN's development of impact analytics and benchmarks. Sophia, could I invite you to come in?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lissa. As Lissa mentioned, my name is Sophia Sunderji, and I sit on the research team at the GIIN, and I have the absolute privilege of working on our impact performance analytics. And so the next reason that today's Iris Plus theme launch is so critical is really because of the foundation it lays for the industry to not only understand, but also compare impact performance across investments. Despite the standardized frameworks that exist, we know that there are still massive challenges that investors, that many of you in the room are faced with today. And there's an opportunity for the GIIN and for Iris Plus to help solve those needs. And so the first major challenge that we hear about is really around impact washing. As the industry grows and develops, so do claims to impact. And so how can investors demonstrate the impact of investments in a way that is credible and backed by data? Secondly, the ability to differentiate on the basis of impact. We hear this from the fund managers in the room who want to stand out from their peers on the basis of impact, and also from the asset owners who are looking to make capital allocation decisions based on standardized, comparable impact information. Which leads us to the final point, really around comparing impact. Investors cannot yet compare the impact of their investments to peer groups and to the social or environmental challenge that's really facing all of them and that they need to solve. And so that's why we are so excited about the potential to use the Iris Plus frameworks as the foundation to build out impact performance benchmarks. And if we hop on over to the next slide, for just a little bit of context, a benchmark itself is an analytic tool that offers impact information within specific sectors, really to help investors compare impact performance to the market. We recently launched the industry's very first pilot impact performance benchmark in financial services and worked with a benchmark design team, a cohort of about 13 leading impact investors, to shape, design, and build the benchmark. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that the benchmark really allows investors to compare impact results to two key comparison points. The first is peer groups, allowing investors to look at their own performance relative to the market and relative to your own peers. And secondly, relative to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the global need, really to understand whether we're truly making progress relative to the challenges that we're looking to tackle. For investors, this offers a tremendous amount of opportunity to help shape and drive decisions in a variety of ways around portfolio construction. So really thinking about investment strategy and decisions around allocating capital in a way that takes impact into account. Secondly, portfolio management. And so when it comes to setting impact targets, engaging with portfolio companies, helping to guide your investments toward greater impact, identifying areas of outperformance relative to peers and to social and environmental thresholds, and also identifying areas of underperformance and opportunities to deepen that impact. And then third and finally, this information can be used in all types of communications and disclosures. And so things like fundraising and impact reporting and sharing impact performance information with LPs, stakeholders, and others in the industry. We recognize that it's especially critical as we are seeing just so many changes in our regulatory environment when it comes to impact performance reporting. And so what we'll see in IRIS Plus is that benchmarkable key performance indicators are now available for 3 categories with more to come. And we welcome you to submit impact data across your investments in financial services. We'll soon be opening up for agriculture with data submissions as well. And we're currently in the process of building out a pilot agriculture benchmark on that front, with energy to follow shortly. And so with that, what I will do is go ahead and offer a very quick overview demo, really to help contextualize all of this information and give you a sense of what the benchmark in financial services looks like. Can everyone see my screen okay? I'm on the IRIS Plus homepage right now. Okay. And so if we go to the IRIS Plus system and we click on the analytics, you'll be taken to the financial inclusion benchmark. It is a pilot benchmark, a beta version. And on the left-hand side, what you'll see here is a bit of a navigation pane. The benchmark offers an overview of who's included in the benchmark in terms of the funds and investments represented, a performance summary, an overview of what impact performance looks like, in this case in financial inclusion, across a set of key performance indicators, and then a bit of a deep dive into those key performance indicators, really to offer folks with an opportunity to dig into the details a little bit more. And at the bottom here, of course, we've got some information on the methodology and acknowledgements. And so if we take a look at the performance overview, what we'll see here is essentially an overview of the key performance indicators that are now available in IRIS Plus, and the opportunity for investors in financial inclusion to submit data across each of these key performance indicators based on what's relevant to investment and impact strategies. We offer insight at the company level, looking at company impact, the investment level, so looking at investment impact, and also the year-on-year change, so looking at the change over time for each investment. We'll see here the benchmark average, but what's especially exciting is the opportunity for those who submit data to get access to custom analytics and understand how your own performance as an organization compares relative to the benchmark average. If you'd like a little bit more insight and information, we are happy to sort of dig into the details or share more background on all of these different impact performance figures and what they mean, and certainly welcome you to dig into it as well on your own. But the final piece that I'll emphasize here for now is just the opportunity to do a bit of a deep dive into each of the key performance indicators. And I'll focus for now here on clients actively using responsible financial services, which is one of those KPIs. You'll see here again that we have the opportunity to look at the company level impact, on average, how many clients are being served each year, the investment level impact, and this is sort of analyzed in alignment with the methodology for comparing and assessing impact performance. And then, of course, that year-on-year change. So what does impact performance look like over time? Has there been a growth in clients accessing responsible financial services? Change really is the crux of impact performance. But what we'll see down here is that comparison not only to peer groups and allowing folks to make that comparison, but also to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so for each KPI where it's relevant, we do offer a little bit of additional context to help folks understand the total gap based on the relevant SDG, in this case 1.4, around ensuring access to basic services, including financial services. What's the total gap that we need to fill? And then what is the pace of change? How quickly do we need to fill it? What is that change that's required year on year to get to a world in which every single individual has access to responsible financial services by 2030? The final piece I'll point to is our alignment on the right-hand side here to the metrics that you'll find in the IRIS Plus system. And that offers, of course, the context and the definitions and the calculation guidance upon which all of these benchmark analytics are built. And so with that, I will turn back over to Lissa to walk us through what is next.
Thank you, Sophia. I'll keep this relatively quick because there's a lot coming next, and I'll just cover it at a very high level. For those of you who have questions on what we've presented today or would like to hear more from our speakers, please feel free to send those questions in the Q&A box as we go along. So, what's next? What's next is that it's actually your turn. We have launched all of this content today, and so it's now available on the website. Please go and explore, build new frameworks for yourself and for the work that you're doing, and let us know what you think. As you've seen in these slides, the IRIS Plus system thrives and grows based on the feedback that we get from our users. And we're excited to hear both what's working well and what you'd like to see us focus on next. The GIIN will continue to build new themes and impact analytics. If you're interested in being involved as we go into new themes, new analytics, all sorts of different work, please feel free to sign up at this link. For those of you who are not already on that, you can also sign up for our newsletter there if you'd like. In the closing survey, once this webinar ends, we'll ask you a question around what your priorities are for next. Kellen has mentioned that our next theme will be climate adaptation and resilience, but we'd like to hear what other priorities exist for you. Or also, as Sophia mentioned, building new and exciting benchmarks. So those will be becoming live as we go. And with that, I think we'll transition over to questions. So question from Lucy about how can one become involved in the scoping process? Great question. The link that I just sent in the chat to the Collaborate forum is where you can sign up. And if there's particular themes that you're interested in, just write the name of the theme or the general topic, and we'll make sure to add you to the expert subgroups, which are the groups that we pull from for the scoping process. Question for also from Lucy on taking, so let me read it. Taking the biodiversity topics, for example, how are the content of those defined? Great question. So the way that we develop the themes, I'll answer top line and then Kellen, let me know if I've missed anything. We partner with an organization that has really deep expertise in that particular space. So on biodiversity, for example, we partnered with the WWF-Netherlands team and also with Arcadis, both of whom have decades of leadership and work in that particular biodiversity space. With them, we built an expert subgroup. I think in that particular one, it was around 100 individuals. And with that group, we talk about what priorities for investors look like, we look at existing resources on different priorities set by the market, priorities set by the investors themselves and by communities, and work with the group to kind of narrow until we get to a good framing for a couple of different strategic goals or angles on impact that investors can take. From there, we work first with the expert subgroup to draft and test, getting a couple of different layers of feedback as we narrow in and refine the content. And then once it's published on our development site, which is called the Navigating Impact Project, we open it up to an industry-wide public comment period, which enables much broader feedback from all sorts of different angles and perspectives and additional geographies that we might have missed the first time. From that point, the public comment period, we're able to finalize the content and then launch it in the IRIS Plus system. And that is what you're seeing today. The only other thing I'll mention in that process is that as we go through it, as you can imagine, there are often a lot of actors, everyone from standard setters to data collection platforms and measurement tools who are also working in that particular space. So we reach out to them and we bring them into the process so that we're able to build alongside a lot of those efforts as they happen. And biodiversity is a really great example of that. There's a lot of work that's really important coming out of the UN and from other actors. And so we worked closely with them to match and try to be in step as much as possible to bring that to the industry as well. Kellen, anything you would add on that point?
No, I think that covers it. And also, Jake, I believe that answer ties into your question about how the metrics are built. They are built on existing evidence and research, and anything related to that is tagged within the definition or usage guidance of each new metric.
Joseph, you asked a question about whether the GIIN has included and defined the term impact washing in its online glossary. It hasn't at this point, although this just came up in conversation yesterday. I'd be curious about what other definitions of impact investing exist, and if you have one, please feel free to send it to us via email. It's an important point, and since the entire purpose of IRIS Plus is to combat impact washing within the industry, to really turn the focus on measuring and proving impact rather than assuming it, it's an important topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. Dan, I love this question. This is how long until the next update? Depends on what you mean by update. On the next update for IRIS Plus themes, that will depend on how many themes we move forward. I think based on the pace that we have so far and that we're still in scoping for climate adaptation and resilience, it'll probably be another 14 to 18 months until we bring new themes, although we're hopeful that we can move faster. It may be sooner that we update the catalog. And I think as Kellen may have mentioned, alongside the launch of these new themes, we've also launched an updated version of the IRIS catalog of metrics, which is the much fuller long list of all metrics within the system. It's about 700, I think it's over 700 at this point. And it's likely that we will update that sooner than that longer time frame for new themes. But again, if we're able to move faster, we certainly will. And that relates. Oh, sorry, Kelly. That relates to your question on updating the frameworks. We, as you just saw, have just launched the first update to the healthcare theme. We did that based on a couple of things, but one main piece was just industry movement. We saw the industry growing, and we started getting a lot of feedback about spaces where that particular theme could grow and could resonate a bit better with the industry as it moved. And so that's to the point that it's very helpful for us to have feedback on the themes as we go along. If you see one that's out of date, please send us new evidence, send us your thoughts, and we will save that for the next time that we're able to open an update.
And Sophia, to your question, that ties in to Alyssa's answer to Dan. So the IRIS full catalog is updated and available to be downloaded alongside the updated glossary terms, and a full version of the big PDF with all the theme information will be refreshed and uploaded to the website shortly.
Great. Moving forward to other questions. Some of these questions are a bit specific to the structure of the system and to how it works. So things like why different impact categories or groups. For those types of questions, I would recommend that that folks join one of our small group demo sessions. We'll be, again, listing another one in the next couple of hours. Scheduling one for later this month or early next, but we'll list it in the next couple of hours. Those are the places where we can get into some more specific answers there, and we can describe a little bit better how the system interrelates different themes so that you can find them, anything that's relevant to the work that you're doing, no matter what your entry point is. We have a great graphic on this that I don't have in this slide, but happy to tackle that one to the person that asked that question. Sophia, there's a question here around benchmarks that I wonder I might throw over to you. The question is, to what extent might benchmarks include the time response dimension to mitigate, for example, against a GP simply self-reporting against benchmarks on an annual cycle when the problem required immediate action?
A fantastic question, and it's a piece that we've thought a lot about. And so in its current form, the data that we're collecting and inviting investors to share with the GIIN for the purposes of impact performance benchmarking is annualized impact data. And we do encourage investors to submit impact data across their portfolio for a given sector, including historical or past impact information. This helps us ensure that we're reflecting impact data not only at a current point in time, but also what past performance looks like. And so that's one element, I think. But the second is that we want to ensure that the impact performance benchmarks are not only reflecting impact at a point in time, but also really emphasizing impact over time. There are a couple of ways that we do that. The first is looking at an impact performance figure that we call pace of change. And really that's looking at the volume of year-on-year change and the percent change. And so by calculating on the back end what that impact performance change looks like, we can then allow investors on the front end to make comparisons based on year-on-year change. But the second element to that is really looking at performance over time a little bit more holistically. And so for each key performance indicator, what we offer under a tab that's called impact performance over time is a graphic that shows how impact performance for each indicator has changed over time based on the sample of data that's available. And so I hope that answers your question. I think from a reporting perspective, what we see in here is that often investors tend to collect impact data from investees and portfolio companies annually. And we certainly invite on a rolling basis for investors to submit data to be included and represented in the benchmark at any time. But we do see that quite frequently it is annual, and we would accept any sort of new submissions of data once they submit it and sort of add it in and represent it in an annualized way in the benchmark.
Thank you, Sophia. I think we'll take two more questions. One, Sophia, I will start with, and I'm hoping you can pick up on. And the other one, I believe, I'll start with, and then Mahalet, there may be something for you to add as well. The first question is on, is there an audit mechanism that mitigates the risk of impact washing, such as third-party certification against prospectively validated GIIN benchmarks? So, Sophia, I can talk a little bit about what we're seeing within the industry in terms of audits, and I wonder if you would speak a little bit about our approach.
Perfect.
So, Joseph, we are seeing a lot of movement in the market around auditing, validation, really deep thinking about how we can make sure that the impact data that we're reporting and using to make decisions is actually valid. I would point out a couple of folks like Bluemark, which is associated with Tideline, which is doing quite a bit on validation and auditing, as well as folks like 60 Decibels, who are kind of working very, very hard to get information directly from stakeholders who are affected, as a way of making sure that it's as valid and as direct as possible. Within Iris Plus, we don't have a certification or validation mechanism, but we're excited to see the industry moving so quickly. And within our own data capture and analytics, we're doing as much as we possibly can to make sure that the data is accurate. And I'll pass it over to Sophia to answer that a little bit more in depth.
Sure, yeah. And so as we're building out the impact performance benchmarks, we are approaching the data collection and analysis the same way that we have all past GIIN research. We have a rigorous process on the back end as we capture data from investors, conduct a data clarification process, and make sure that that all looks good and makes sense, and we'll go back to investors for those clarifications before anything appears on the front end in the benchmark itself. The other piece I'll mention is that, of course, all of the impact performance data is anonymized and represented in aggregate. So in the benchmark, you are not able to see individual investees and what their results are, but rather at the aggregate level and in various sort of subsegments of the sample, here's what impact performance looks like. To that end, we are not at this time conducting any third-party verifications of the impact data. It is self-reported, and so definitely something important to keep in mind.
Great, thank you, Sophia. And the last question we'll tackle here is candidly one that touches on a really big area of learning for us this time. I'll start, and Mahalet, I'll invite you into the conversation as well. The question is, how are Indigenous rights considered in the Iris Plus impact categories? We spent a lot of time researching and learning from a lot of the preeminent thinkers and Indigenous individuals who have gone out and kind of explained how the impact investing industry needs to rethink its approaches. What we ended up doing first, as an entry point through the racial equity theme, but then we were kind of brought up to speed by our partners in the sustainable agriculture space and a couple of others as well. That was thinking really deeply about how we interact with and support and can shift some of those interactions with Indigenous peoples. The way that we ended up approaching it for now is that wherever it was possible, we pulled in research on how different systems, how different investment practices and particular business models affect and interact with Indigenous peoples. We did that, for example, in the healthcare theme by looking at evidence about how COVID and other just chronic health conditions create inequitable outcomes for like Native Americans here in the US and Indigenous peoples elsewhere, and wrap that in really deeply. We also created disaggregations within the metrics to allow to actually study and look at outcomes for those groups. We created a couple of metrics, and one in particular that's asking investors to describe in depth how they interact and effectively share power, work with Indigenous groups. I will say it's not a perfect answer. I think that we learned a lot in this process, and we have a long way to go. But you will see within the metrics across a number of different themes, the movement that we've made, and we look forward to hearing what does work about what we've published today and where we can go stronger even in the next couple of years, and as we create new themes and refresh the previous ones. And Mahalet, I would invite you here as well to jump in if there's anything you would add.
Thank you, Lisa. All I would add is that it's such an important question, and it goes to the process by which the themes and impact categories are developed and launched. And it also goes to the content. And as it relates to the racial equity theme, you know, there obviously throughout the process an intentional invitation to a broad group of stakeholders from Indigenous groups as well as others that are historically not included and brought into these conversations to help shape and develop these metrics. In addition to that, we also ensured that we were very intentional about naming the marginalization as it relates to Indigenous communities and investing practices. But as Lisa said, this is just the beginning, it's not the end. And so getting the feedback on what's missing, what needs to be strengthened is so important as this work continues. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Mahalet. And thank you everyone for your really thoughtful questions. We are excited to hear more of them in the coming months and hopefully weeks as you take a look pretty soon. With that, we will wrap this webinar up. Thank you so much for joining us for the launch, and I'm excited to hear what you think of the content as you dive into it. Thanks, everybody.